Acts 17, I think.
I like my life.
I like that thing too. What?
No.
Okay.
Well, I look at it, and I just kind of, all of this changes. In this, it's, I haven't got it all figured out yet.
Well, you better keep an eye on it or it might disappear.
I got a full lamp that does the very same thing.
I like-
It's a
I like that.
chair. Now I'm waiting for my glasses so I can sit in there and read.
Acts 17, verse 22. We'll just start in verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription, To the unknown God. Whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the God is likened to gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. The times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commanded all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained. Whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, in that he raised him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, We will hear thee again of this matter. So Paul departed from among them, howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed, among the which was Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Dear Heavenly Father, would you thank you for the time to come together and study your word, and look at the issues that Paul lays out here regarding you as the creator, as he begins to lay out this issue of worship to what they called the unknown God, but Paul declares it to be you, the true and living God. We give you thanks and praise in all things, Lord. In your name, amen. So that's exactly what's happening. Paul's at Mars Hill, where all the world comes, all the great thinkers of their day come together, and they argue the things of philosophy and all the things that they do. I guess you could call it, that day's Facebook. They come together and just want to hear the newest thing. And he talks about this issue of the unknown God, and we worked through all those things. We actually ended in verse 26, where I went and we spent quite a bit of time looking at that issue of God has appointed the bounds of the nations. Mm-hmm. He determined where the nation's going to be, how long it's going to last, what its borders will be, and things of that nature. And he's really laying this out. Now, one thing we need to remember, too, is when Paul goes to these people, these are Gentiles, he lays out God. You don't see that when he goes to the synagogue to the Jews. He just uses their scriptures to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. He doesn't start back at creation. He didn't have to, right? Theoretically, that's a given. They believe all the way up to what we would call the end of Malachi. In their Bible, it'd be the end of 2 Chronicles. But we were talking about sharing the gospel. One of the things when you share the gospel is know who you're talking to. Make sure you are giving the proper information. You're not boring somebody, and what happens then? They tune you out. So by the time you get to the good stuff, they've already tuned you out. Or if you're just over their head and they don't get it anyhow. What's the best way to figure out where somebody's at?
Ask them questions.
Listen.
When a person walks in here, that's the first thing we want to do is talk to them, let them express themselves, and get acquainted with them.
Yeah, people ask me, what happens when a trucker walks? I said, well, we kind of interview them. We just have a little conversation about them and try and figure out, so, and that's always good. The best way to know where somebody's at, because you're not the judge, but the best way to figure out where somebody's at is just ask them. Let them tell you. And you'd be amazed how often listening. We were talking about this the other day. Not listening to have an answer, but listening to hear what they have to say.
one thing in here, and this is a lot easier to witness to a person than maybe it might be in your church. When you go to church, then people just, they're like, can't you see that I'm a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
When Dravit walks in here, we don't know him,
Right.
and he knows that we don't know him. So we like to get acquainted. So we'll talk a little bit, just kind of getting acquainted. And I might say, well, where do you stand spiritually? And they're very sincere in their answers.
Mm.
And it's like I told you about Pam that got saved. When I asked her that same question, she said, well, I believe in God. She said, they call him the man upstairs, used to, and then she started calling him the God the Father. Then at that point, I says, well, when you go into eternity, where would you go? And just as simple as that. And then she started getting down that list of
That's
good
great.
things.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
good.
now you got a good idea how to deal with it.
That's right.
You said, you almost want to try and figure out where they are spiritually. That's what Paul did. Paul walked through the city, and he could determine, I know where this city is spiritually.
Yeah.
They got so many. I think we said last time, one of their own poets back in the day, jokingly made the comment, it's easier to find an idol in Athens than a man. That's how many idols there were. And of course, he picks up with this false god, and he talks about being too superstitious.
Well, when you ask a person, where do you stand spiritually? You're not saying that you don't think he's a Christian.
Right.
I mean, because you can offend people if you would do that. So, but if there's a lot of Christians come in and say, well, I'm not the way I should be. I mean, I've backslid, I got saved. So, I mean, when you say, where do you stand spiritually, that just covers the whole thing. Now, whatever answer you get, you haven't offended,
Mm-hmm.
but you know where to start.
Sure, exactly. And you also know the language to use.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to come in and would walk through the door and sit down right there and say, can you teach me John 3:16 and tell me how to be born again? Sure. It's not going to be a discussion about, well, maybe that's not a term for us today.
Yeah, right.
Let's understand where we're at, who we're talking to. Let's get them saved, and we'll worry at the other stuff later. So that's really what we spent last time on, and I'm going to follow up on more of that because there's some important things here to understand. But verse 26, he talks about, he made of one blood all nations for men. There's one race, guys, just one, and it's the Adamic race, the human race. That's when Jesus came in the form of a man to save mankind. Now there are different characteristics that make up what we call the races today. But I hope we all understand we are all one race, and just because your skin color is one thing, or your skin color doesn't mean you're any better or worse or any of that stuff. Okay, and then God determined the times before appointed, how long the nations were going to last, and the bounds of their habitation. And there's a big discussion. Well, is that still something that's happening today? My opinion on that would be yes, it is, because a lot of the things. People will come and say, well, this was something that God did in time past, so that's not happening today in the day of grace. But Paul's talking about it in the dispensation of grace, and I don't see any reason why it would have changed. Because the reason that we have nations is still the same, and it's in the very next verse. He hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation of the nations. Why? That they should seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. There's a lot here. The reason for nations is so that the people, if they want to, that word happily is not happy. It's not like happily. The word is if by chance, if happenstance, if perhaps they would like to seek the Lord, they can. And we'll look at that a little more and how that works out here. But that's the reason. And when you start to understand that, you begin to understand some of the things about respecting the leaders of the government. Not necessarily so much the people that occupy them, but the office.
Right.
The office. And, we live in a day, and it's probably, in fact, I know it's always been this way, where we mock the politicians, and we even mock the offices, right? I mean, because, and ultimately, why is that? Are we intentionally trying to mock God? No, that's not what it's because who occupies those offices?
Humans.
Frail men, or women, but mankind, right? That have quite frankly, they have the same shortcomings that we do.
Yep, that's right.
But we should still pray for our leaders, that they would somehow come across some godly counsel, make some godly decisions. You know, we're never going to be we were never a Christian nation to begin with, but we are never going to be a Christian nation again. We've been founded on some things. We live in a pluralistic society, and quite frankly, anytime a government has been run by a religion, it's never worked out well, ever. And it won't until Jesus Christ comes back and sets up his kingdom, and that'll be the Jewish religion of all things. But there should be a quietness, there should be an order, there should be the circumstances that allow you, if you want, to seek the Lord. You know, you guys heard me say it a million times. In the midst of a natural disaster, in the midst of a terrible thing that's gone on, are people worried about getting a Wednesday night Bible study?
No.
No. They're worried about what? Getting water for their families and clean diapers and for their babies and where the next meal is coming from, and are they going to be safe tonight? And okay, well, the government should take care of that. Not in a manner of welfare, but the government should make sure that we're safe. Should make sure that we have clean water and clean food. Things of that, so that we can go on to do these things. And of course, what do we do in America? Well, around the world, they take America out of it. What do we do with that free time? Football. However you define football, either American football or soccer, right?
The lust of our
Cricket,
flesh instead
the lust of the flesh,
yeah.
the movies, right? Where all the movies are giving their awards right now. The movies, you know, watching dating shows on TV, whatever it is, you know, finding our music.
Especially we're not conformed to the world, right?
Exactly, exactly. And it's so funny, we talk about that, and I go home and I go, wow, I'm just conforming to the world, you know. We've got the time, but we choose to spend, and that's what he's saying here. You know, even at that, God doesn't make you go do this. He says that's the function of government, so in case you want to go do this, you can.
Yeah, live in a peaceful society, so at your own will you can go and serve the Lord.
Again,
yeah.
I want you to see, though, the issue of free will.
Yeah.
You don't have to get saved. If you want to get saved, you can. You don't. Once you get saved, you don't even have to study. You should, but you don't have to. God, I don't think we oftentimes understand the depths of the love that God has for free will. Because that's what that's the Godhead deals with itself amongst free will. And yet they work as a cohesive unit, if I can put it in human terms, right? We use free will what? To look out for number one. They use free will to look out for each other.
To love each other, yeah.
Exactly. So I want to take some time and look at some things. We've seen some of this before, but I want to look at why we have nations. And again, Paul brings it up here, and I think there's just some interesting things that when you start to look at, you start to understand that, boy, God really is a God of order. So, and the reason what's so important is then you come over to Ephesians and Colossians and start reading about these principalities and powers and mights and dominions in the heavenly places and on the earth. You start to understand, man, that's the way God set things up way back when.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it. So if you would, I want you to come with me all the way back to Genesis 2. So what we see in Genesis is 4 great institutions that God set up. And we'll see how they all work together to produce what Paul's talking about over there in Acts. So look at what I say, Genesis 2 and verse 16. The Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Okay, so God tells Adam, eat whatever you want, eat it freely, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat that one. And then he tells him why. Okay? Why did God feel it necessary to tell Adam that?
Because he had a choice.
Because he had a choice. Exactly. right? If God could God just have zapped Adam and
left that tree out of there.
and but even if he put the tree there, couldn't he have just made his desire? Couldn't he have made Adam in such a way that that tree repulsed Adam,
Yeah.
Okay.
so it wouldn't even be a temptation? But he didn't. But he could have.
Mm-hmm.
But then it wouldn't have been a choice.
There you go. That's exactly. Look over at Galatians or Genesis 3. Genesis 3 and verse 6. The woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired to make one wise. She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked, so fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. I don't really want to get into the doctrine in the immediate passage other than this. Okay, Dorothy just brought it up. They had a choice. You brought it up. They had a choice. Now, what do you see in chapter 3?
There's two of them.
No, they're executing that choice. They've made a decision about that choice, right? They've made a decision. God said, don't do it. It was there. So God gave them free will in chapter 2. Adam was the only one on the planet at the time. But then you see it work out. You see the proof of the fact that God gave them free will in that they disobeyed.
Mm-hmm.
They could have decided to obey. They had a choice, right? They made the other choice. This is what I'm trying to get you to see is the very first institution, as we call it, that God created, God put on earth, was that issue of free will, what we call volition. Another way to put it is the value of the individual, the self-determination of an individual, the rights of the if we use our language, the right of an individual to make his own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big deal. And you wonder, and you can, there's this thinking, we often think about a statement like what I just said in the political terms. Yeah, well, our government's taking all our rights away. And that may or may not be true, and that's a discussion for another day. But there's this other side of this, and I've got a family member that thinks this, that thinks the collective or the community is more important than the individual. And here's where that thinking ends up. Well, it ends up in Planned Parenthood is where it ends up. But it ends up in Darwinian theory of evolution, the survival of the fittest when applied to humankind. Hey, if there's a group of people or a race of people that can't survive, so be it. We're better off to not have them. If there's
survival of the fittest.
somebody that's born with a defect, you know what? It's okay that we don't keep that person alive. If we know they're going to be born with a defect, it's okay to kill them. Okay, now what do we do? We're more concerned with the community, and what are we not doing anymore? We're not valuing the individual, not valuing life. I'll be very careful how I say this, so please understand. I don't care about the quality of the individual, and I mean everybody's. I put great value on the individual, right? But a lot of people will look at somebody and think that person maybe doesn't have value, when that's not true. But a person may be born with a defect, or what comes to mind so often with me is a Down syndrome baby. I don't know if you've ever been around a Down syndrome baby. Boy, you can't help but be in a good mood.
They still have a soul.
Yeah, they have a soul. They have what's that? Oh,
yeah.
They're loving, and they always got a smile on their face, and they're kind. I mean, there's just some. I don't know all the genetics about it, but again, and a terrible thing. The election 3 or 4 elections ago, they told one of the people that had a Down syndrome baby they should have aborted that baby. And that's where the thinking gets to when you forget about the issues of free will and the issues of essentially the value of a human life, no matter what that human life is, the value of that human life, God makes it very important, and you see that in those issues of free will, the issues of self-determination, right? If you can self-determine, you're pretty important, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way, right? But you don't let a dog or a cat, well, you let your cat determine herself, but you don't let a pet be in charge because they don't have that value.
Right.
That an individual.
They're just instincts only.
Yeah, that a human being that God has put into. Okay, so And again, like people say, well, free will, yeah, well, that's great. But if you understand what's going on there, and then you understand how society, and it's not just our society, it's actually been the way societies have always been, not valuing that individual. The collective is more important. The community is more important than the individual. Now, you don't want, and there's balance there, but you don't want somebody to come in and destroy a community. But you need to understand, and I think this will help too, a lot of people with their guilt, is that God, that'll help you understand too why God loves everybody enough to send his son to die for him. He values everybody as what? As an individual.
Yeah.
He says everybody, he values everybody with such, he said, I'm going to send he loves everybody so much, and values them so much as an individual. He says, I'm going to send my son to die for your sins. He's going to be buried, he's going to be risen again for your justification. And I love you enough to self-determine if you're going to believe that or not. That's an amazing God. That's an amazing God, because we certainly wouldn't do it that way.
Right.
We'd make them love us.
Right.
And if they didn't, and we gave them an opportunity to, we'd make them to take advantage of the opportunity. Don't ever underestimate the value that God places on an individual. And
Right.
you should place on an individual. Not in an issue of arrogance, but an issue of just worth.
Well, if you follow the teaching, just like we'll just esteem others higher than ourselves. I mean,
Right.
everything we're taught is
Yep.
to think of others.
That's right.
And if we love one another, then the more we do it, the more we're going to do. In other words, I thought different times, if we could just follow that way of thinking, you'd get pleasure get out here on the highway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The thing you do going through back and forth doing your work, everybody be getting along with each other.
It's
Yeah.
a
Wouldn't have much of a job that way.
Yeah, it's a great point
With
you
that
say.
simple
You say
rule.
though, if you esteem somebody better than yourself, aren't you automatically by default declaring that other person has some kind of intrinsic value
Oh yeah.
Sure.
just for breathing, just for being alive?
Yep.
Aren't you allowing that person even to have free will? If you're going to esteem them, not getting in the way of letting them make a decision.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Sometimes we go, really, yeah, free will, great, that's awesome, but we miss the other part of that is the value, the individuality, the right to self-determination that God gave us right at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
God, is there anything wonderful about having a bunch of robots praise you?
It's empty. It's empty void.
Yeah, big deal. I can get a tape recorder. I can get my phone and make it talk to me and tell me how great I am.
Right.
Can't get my wife to do that, but I can make my phone do it. That's free will. Look with me here over at Genesis 2 again in verse 21. The Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, closed up the flesh instead thereof, and the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall the man leave his father and his mother, they shall cleave unto his wife, they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. What did we just read there? Marriage.
A marriage,
Right? That's
husband
the
and wife.
institution of marriage. That's the second great institution that God set up, is marriage. What's interesting to me is Moses tells you about it here. Jesus Christ quotes this passage in Matthew, and Paul quotes it again in Ephesians. In other words, that's what we call a transdispensational truth. Marriage is between a man and a woman, one man, one woman. It's been that way from the beginning. Both, and Jesus actually quotes it. This is the only time that Jesus talks about creation, is quoting this verse.
Really? Wow.
And then Paul. So a couple things about that. In marriage, now I understand, especially in sometime in Bible times, you had arranged marriages, but basically in marriage, isn't that ability to choose who you want to spend the rest of your life with? Free will. Now, what do you do when you become married too? You become one flesh.
Mm-hmm.
When you become one flesh, what do? You said it a moment ago.
You
You
esteem
should
others more
esteem
yourself.
others better than yourselves. You allow that other person to have some free will in regards to this. You see how the institution of marriage shows value and helps protect that individual through that. You become one flesh. You become greater than the sum of your parts, if I can put it that way, right? In a properly operating marriage. Now, let me bring it to current day. The teaching today, the marriage is between one man and one woman. However you feel about the other stuff, what God calls marriage is one man, one woman. It's always been that way. People want to come and say, well, marriage is just an institution that was created by the church. Marriage is just an institution created by the patriarchy, created by government. No, none of that's true. Marriage is an institution created by God.
That's right.
When there were only two people on the planet, it wasn't something that, and he's never pulled that away. He's never said, okay, marriage is no longer a deal. I've changed marriage, and he has changed things, right? He's changed the dietary laws for people from time to time, right? He's changed the method of relation to him, right? God hasn't changed. I mean, you can see law versus prophecy, but this is one institution. In fact, all four of these institutions that we're going to look at, he's never changed. So again, now the marriage comes along and it protects, and it takes the individual, and you have two individuals that come together for what? One purpose: to become one flesh. Again, and then they make a self-determination. What are some of the things that married people maybe make a decision about?
When to start a family.
When to start a family. Where to live.
What job to have.
What job to have. Things like that. How are we going to go forward together? Work out the issues. Well, I want to, but you don't. But I want to do this, but you don't. You want to do it, but I don't. Working out that issue. Practicing of love. Practicing of allowing free will, of understanding volition. Look over at Genesis 4. Verse 1. So you've got individuals. Individuals come together and create what's called a marriage. Verse 4. Chapter 4, verse 1. Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of ground. And it goes on. What I want you to see is what's happening here.
Family.
Family's being made. Two individuals have come together, made a decision to be together, made a decision to have a family, and then that marriage produces a family. Now, in a family, what typically should you have in a properly operating family? What do you have? What's kind of a picture of it, if I can get that?
Children.
Well, that's a tough question because I know the answer I'm looking for. Don't you have order?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The way God set it up, right? Man, wife, children. Right? Now, one's not better than the other.
They're
It's
just these roles,
right?
right?
Roles and an issue of order. Now, that family unit, or the marriage unit, protects the family, and that family unit is to protect marriage. You see how God designed it. He gave people free will, then they came together to propagate on the planet, and then inside that they were to use their free will to decide how and when to do that and make some decisions. One of those decisions that they could make is that they could seek the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, we haven't seen the government part yet. We'll see that in a little bit. So he's got these institutions set up in chapter 4. He's got volition before the fall, marriage before the fall, family happens after the fall. Okay? What happened, though, from this point forward? People have free will, people are free to make family, get married, and people are free to make families. And that's it.
Becomes more people.
What happens, right? And what more people? Where does that ultimately end up in the Bible?
In wars.
In the flood, right? And people being so evil. Thoughts of their hearts are only evil continually. Because what's happened? There's nothing there to maintain the order. Every group becomes just worried about their own clan.
Right.
Cain's only worried about Cain. He's taken it to the extreme. His individualness, his free will is he knows better than God. Well, I don't want to get into it, but he brings an offering that's not acceptable. He knows better than God, and he gets mad. He said, "I'll show you, God. Hey, Cain, hey Abel, come here." And Cain, what's he think? He's making decisions for himself.
Right.
God says, okay, you're going to be a wanderer. He says, okay, your punishment's too great. Okay, I'll give you Mark Cain. Okay, thanks. You told me to wander? I'm going to build a city, and I'm going to name that city not after you, God, but I'm going to name it after my own son. Building, have a name for ourselves, what they said at the Tower of Babel. Time goes on. By the time the flood, by some accounts, there's 2, 3, 4 billion people on the planet. And God says, every thought of their hearts is evil continually. So he wipes out humanity, right? Except for 8 people. Okay? Come with me over to Genesis 9. In verse 1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. The flood's over, the boat's out, they're off the boat. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So up until this time, God only gave them plants to eat. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm of the personal opinion that there were people eating animals before this. They were disobeying God. But at this point, he says, okay, you can go eat those animals. Now, they're going to run from you. They're going to be scared of you. But if you can catch them, you can eat them. Okay. Verse 4. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of blood.
Life of man.
Life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. Okay, here's what you see. What you see now is human government developing. Mm-hmm. Okay? If you have the power over life and death, which is what that verse is talking about, that's about the supreme power you can have on the planet, right, isn't it? Yep. You have the power of life and death. Now, there's a guideline there. Somebody kills somebody. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the power of the state. Now, we're talking about human government to maintain order. Mm-hmm. To go all the way back to when they started the family and Cain killed Abel. Now, human government should say that's not right and should bring an end to that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I want to see is now you have human government. The purpose of human government is to maintain the first 3 institutions. Government is supposed to provide a safe place and to maintain and value the family. When that family is valued, the relationship between a mother and a father has to be valued. And when the relationship between a father and a mother is valued, the free will of the individual is valued because it's a picture of the respect they have one for another. One is based on the other going whichever way you want to go. You have free will to determine who you want to marry, to determine then the family you're going to have. Going backwards, the family is the product of a marriage unit operating as it should, based on properly executed free will. Now what happens, of course, is we're in the flesh and we don't do it. All we care about is us, or our family, or our clan, as they would. So God brings about human government to maintain what? Order. To protect these things. Now, let's bring it to our day. You guys know I don't get political often, but this is about as close as I'm going to get, and I believe every word I'm about to say, obviously. But you see that destruction here in America. We gave up on the value of a family. A family can look like a lot of different things now. 2 mommies, 2 daddies, and it's been like that. Mm-hmm. Okay? Where did that beginning of that downfall really happen in our country?
They took the Bible out of the school.
Well, I would say there's one event, and I would call it Woodstock. 2 events. Wow. Woodstock, free love, the free love generation. It's not outside of marriage. It's not between a mommy and a daddy anymore. It's whatever. And then the family is not valued any longer. So now we've lost the value of a family, of the traditional family. You lose the value of a family. Do you really need the value of a traditional marriage? No.
You know, as I think back to during the Second World War, I remember that very well. The home, the family, because we break down that family, and then we got the the helter skelter, and then eventually we got Woodstock. What I'm saying is been a progression.
Yes.
Because I remember, everything back then was for the war effort.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody the mothers that used to be at home taking care of the families, they're now out in the defense plants, as they call it. And once they were out there, some of them didn't choose to come back in. And so, but anyway, the families that, from that point, I think really started breaking down.
That's right.
And from that time on, just like in our government now, you got a bunch of whining, kids.
You got the hippies and the children of hippies running the
Yeah.
government now. I mean, that's their age. It's interesting you bring up the war though, because I've never served, but I understand the government, which is what the army is and the military is, valued families so much they wouldn't send brothers
Right.
to do certain things. That's how important it was to the government through the military to support the family, that they wouldn't let brothers end up in certain places.
There was a case where there was, I don't know how many brothers that got killed all in, because they didn't one group.
Right.
So from that time on, they wouldn't.
Yeah. So you see you go to the free love generation where the family's not valued anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And just whatever. And then what you had, anything can be a family. If you call it a family, it can be a family, no matter what it is. Okay. And from human good, that sounds okay.
But it's not.
Okay. And then what? So and then after you had that, everybody comes along and says, well, the gays are ruining marriage. No, the gays aren't. You know who gave up on marriage? The rich white Protestants at Woodstock and the free love generation gave up on marriage. It was married people that ruined marriage. We blame the wrong people. It's the children of the greatest generation that didn't need marriage anymore. Okay. So now the families, so you have that, the family gets destroyed. And then you jump forward to 1973. And what's the big event in 1973?
Roe versus Wade.
Roe v. Wade. And you have the ultimate expression of the lack of value of an individual. Since that time, last number I saw was 62 million babies.
Wow, so
Since
many.
1973 have been killed. Again, here's the political side of me come out. Where's the women's rights activists about that? Presumably 51% of those or 50% of those were girls, were women. Then the other side of that is what happened in the late 80s and early 90s was physician-assisted suicide, end-of-life issues. Now, I understand they're different issues. It's totally different to kill an unborn baby than to somebody that's lived a wonderful, full life, is in this incredible pain, doesn't want to go through it, and wants to make a decision to end their life. I'm not comparing the decision-making process, but there's an issue of the value of an individual's life.
Right.
Okay. Ultimately, and that all started to fall apart when we didn't value that. Now we've come all the way now where you got a governor of West Virginia saying, yeah, if the baby's supposed to be aborted and we mess up the abortion and it's born live, then we're going to have a discussion and we may or may not keep that baby alive. We're not talking about we're not talking about the body of the mother anymore. The baby's 15 feet away.
Yeah.
That's how far this has come. It's come to where we have a legitimate discussion now today. Well, if a baby has a defect, is it okay to kill it, to abort it? Whatever nice word you want to use. That's going all the way back, and now we've lost the value of an individual.
Right.
The just intrinsic value that God puts in every soul, every being, regardless. I would think very few of those people that are born with defects that some would say should have been aborted would say, I wish my mom wouldn't have had me. I guess there was an ad that was going to run at the Super Bowl. It didn't run. They wouldn't accept it. But it was a bunch of people that somehow they found out their mother made a decision not to abort them. I guess every mother makes that decision in our country now, but there was a discussion in that mother. But that'd be a powerful ad.
Yeah.
But that's the purpose of human government, to protect these institutions, to protect and value family, to protect and value marriage, and to protect and value the individual. And now we're at the point, too, where we have so many things where there is no value to the individual. Just pieces that can be plugged in here and there, and we don't look at them. It's political season. And what do we hear? Nobody talks about the individual. Everybody talks about the group. There's this group that's a demographic, and this group that's a demographic, and this group's the demographic.
Right, it's
and
true.
And
yeah.
you know what? They're all wrong.
They're all individuals.
They're all wrong. Every single one of those groups is made up by an individual that can think for themselves.
Yep, that's right.
And when you put them in the group and say every person in such and such group, whatever that group is, thinks alike, what are you doing? You're minimizing the value of the individual in that group.
Yeah.
And all you're doing now is you're working for the group and not for the individual, and that's going to bring out the worst in us. In all people. Okay, so that's national government to protect those institutions, and then Paul lets us know to protect it, to give you safety, right? This government here is to keep law and order, to keep rule and order. If you kill somebody, like I said, you have the ultimate power. Human governments to come along, maintain an orderly society, so if you want, you can go out and you can seek after God. Inherent in that is what? In human government is what? Nations. We saw that last time. We looked at all those verses, starting with Paul, that talked about nations, and God set the nations. And we looked at the Tower of Babel when the nations got set up, and all those things, and that Satan wanted to be some. Well, come with me over to Isaiah 10.
Isaiah what?
10. We're going to pick it up in verse 5. We're going to talk about this Assyrian. He's a type of this is a prophetic passage about the Antichrist. Of course, in the context, the Assyrian in Isaiah's day would have simply been a type of Antichrist. Okay, chapter 10, verse 5. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil and to take the prey and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. He's saying, I'm going to use that guy to chasten you, Israel. That's what God's saying, okay? Howbeit he meaneth not so, neither doth his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. For he saith, Are not my princes altogether kings? Is not Calno as Carmush? Is not Hamath as Arpad? Is not Samaria as Damascus? As my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria, shall not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? In other words, God's going to allow to use the Antichrist to chasten and to come in and to destroy and take over Israel. The Antichrist is not going to think that. He's going to think, look what I'm doing. I've destroyed that nation and her idols, and I destroyed that nation and her idols, and you know what? I'm going to destroy Jerusalem and her idol, which is not an idol, but is really the real, true, and living God, right? Mm-hmm. Not understanding that it's God that's actually using him to rule Israel with a rod of iron.
Wow.
Okay. It's a difficult passage. I just want you to get to thinking of what God has allowed it. The Antichrist says, look what I did. Okay, but God, okay. With that in mind, verse 12. Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, when the tribulation's over, the whole work's done, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. Okay, tribulation's over, God's now going to deal with the Antichrist. This is what the Antichrist said. For he saith, By the strength of my hand have I done it, and by my wisdom. For I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people. Remember, Paul told us that he set the bounds? Mm-hmm. God set the bounds? The Antichrist says, I've removed the bounds of the people. I have robbed their treasures. I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. And my hand hath found as a nest the riches of the people, and as one gathered eggs that are left, have I gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing, or opened the mouth, or peeped. The Antichrist is trying to destroy nationalism. That's what he's doing here.
One world government.
One world government. I mean, here we go down that down that wormhole, if you will, the big conspiracy, the Trilateral Commission, and all those things. I don't know about all that. What I do know is God set up nations so that to protect these institutions and so that people could seek after God. And I know what the Antichrist is going to do is he's going to destroy those nations, those national boundaries. boundaries. And when he does, he's going to take the coffers, right? What makes a nation powerful? Money. Take that money away and put it into my coffers, the Antichrist coffers. He's got the power.
Right.
Then he can tell those nations what to do, who to worship, where to go, completely destroy the value of the individual. And what's he going to be doing? He's going to be sitting in the temple saying, I am God. One world government, tearing down the borders, unsecure countries, and I don't mean to get into the specifics of our politics in our nation right now, is a satanic plan. Do not miss that. God set up the borders, and the borders change, and I get all that. But nationalism is something that was set up by God. This issue and this desire to have one world government, and hey, George Bush is a big proponent of that. I get all that. One religion, zero borders, is a satanic policy against God and against His Word. And don't miss that. It's not just people trying to get people into a country to get their vote. So that's true in the immediacy. But ultimately, we talk so often, right? The battle's not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wicked in the high places.
Yeah.
This debate about, one group wants all the immigrants to come in so that they have cheap labor, and the other group wants the immigrants to come in so that they have all the votes. That's what they think. But ultimately, Satan's plan is to undermine nationalism. And it's not just in America. You see it in Europe. You see it all over.
That's the whole thing right there, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We don't think about that enough.
That's right.
No, we don't.
That's right. God's not dealing with nations today, but he has set up the borders of the nations, and he set up the border set the borders for a reason. We need to appreciate that, so we understand what's going on, because we will just kind of walk around like everything's just the immediacy and the flesh and the blood. But there's a plan. There's something going on. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, we looked about all those things that are going on. The Prince of Grecia, right? And Gabriel's trying to come down to the earth, and it takes him 21 days.
Yeah.
Right.
It took Jesus a couple hours. He got stopped. He said, he couldn't even get through the princes. I had to bring Michael down. And when I go back, that prince is going to be gone, but there'll be another prince. That's all stuff's happening. It's all real. So when we see these things in the world, it's why it's so important to have a biblical perspective.
Right.
It'll let you, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but it might let you know what's going on.
Well, if you can look at it from the biblical angle, it'd be a lot more, less frustration, put it that way. If you realize that this is, what's really going on.
Yep.
I mean, we can argue back and forth about Trump and who's the elections and all like this, but it's going to go the way that it's set to go.
Yes,
That's
that's
right.
right.
It's not in our hands, really.
Yeah.
That's right. And again, let's go back to where we started. What did Paul say when he started this thing about nations? How many races are there?
There's one race.
One. Somebody from a different country is not worth any more or any less than we are.
Right.
But that they're from that nation, and there's nothing wrong with immigration and all those things. It's the borderless society where we're going to that's really the issue. That one world government, because that one world government is not going to be God's world.
No, that's
God's
the thing.
government. It's going
not.
to be the satanic government.
Right.
I forget. I hate that. I interrupted myself. Forgot what I was going to say. Oh man, look over at Romans 13. You see, when the world attacks, and let's be clear, when I talk about the individual, the ability of an individual for self-determination, we're not talking about living in a lawless society. Paul's talking about national borders, which means you have to have human government.
Right.
Okay? God is a God that sets up government. It's okay for a government to put the limits on things. We saw the limit. If you can't kill people. If you kill people, you will die. And it's okay. It's that issue of taking away the value of that individual, of minimizing that, where human government has gone so far astray today. Romans 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Now let's be clear. Let's not do silly stuff with this verse. He's talking about the offices that people hold. President, mayor, governor, dog catcher, city councilman, whatever it is, okay? God did not put Saddam Hussein or Hitler or any of those people in office, okay? Who did that?
Man
Man did that. Okay, so the issue here is the office.
is the office.
Look at verse 2. Now think about the city that we live in and the bumper stickers we've seen for the last 3.5 years. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. See, now think about this. Think about this. Think about, and these for the most part are right-wingers. Wrap themselves in white nationalism, wrap themselves in the Bible, and what do they say? Your government, talking to the American government of where they were born, say your government has no authority over me. That's a direct violation of what Paul is saying right there. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil, right? The way God set it up, the office of the president is not designed to go after and get people that are obeying the law. It's designed to get the people that are doing evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Man, there's a powerful one, huh? Those offices he set up, God uses them almost as his proxy. Does that make sense? Again, we're not talking about the people that are in those offices, but the offices. Verse 5, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. There's a good April 15th verse. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Again, the issue is the offices, not the people.
Right.
You pay your taxes so that the government can do the things the government's supposed to do. Now, the other discussion, well, the government's wasteful and expensive. Yeah, that's all true. But you know what? That's not in this verse. It doesn't say it doesn't say pay tribute unless the government's wasteful.
Or gripe about it.
You would say something, Glenn?
Well, I was just thinking, it's kind of goes just the same principles back in Ephesians chapter 6, where Paul's talking to the servants, but then he's talking to the masters. And he's letting them know that God's not a respecter of persons. The people who hold that office, like the master, he held an office. If he abused his servants, then God's going to deal with it.
Yeah.
So the people that, even though we got people in government, that the office itself, we're supposed to respect.
Right.
And the person in that office, God will deal with it. I would imagine. I mean, it's
Hey, and I say again, God's not on your political side. I just think about our last two presidents, and I don't want to get into the issues, but all these people that thought Obama couldn't be a Christian and was going to hell. His attestation is that he is a Christian, is that he was. Now, go forward, the guy we got in office now, there are people that think he's the greatest Christian to ever walk the planet since the Lord Jesus Christ or Paul. He's a terrible example.
Yeah.
He wraps himself in the Bible. Finds a few. If you get wrapped up in the men,
Right. You'll always be disappointed.
or the women, you get it's the office and what's going on. And I'll say again, I mean, this verse doesn't say anything about, well, don't pay your taxes if you don't agree with the government decisions. Don't pay your taxes if the government's wasteful. I mean, Solomon was wasteful. First, look over a couple more. We'll be done. 1 Timothy 2. This is probably a good lesson as I want to call it playoff season, as political season kicks off. 1 Timothy 2 and verse 1. He says, I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. Now, how should you pray for the people? He tells you. The prayer should be that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. That's the prayer for your leaders. Not that I hope they'll see things my way,
Yeah.
but they'll somehow come across and heed some godly counsel and be able to lead the nation, the municipality, the dog catcher route, whatever it is, any that are in authority, so that we can lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. If you're leading a quiet and a peaceable life, can you, if you want, seek after God?
You can.
You see how they're starting to fall? All these things are starting to fall in together now, in the place. If you don't live a quiet and peaceable life, can you seek after God?
No.
You don't have time. And I mean, that's not meant to be rude. It's just the very real concerns of just staying alive dominate you.
Right.
Yeah, this guy was in here today, and he was talking how the socialism, deals. I mean, you don't have that freedom like that we have here, that the government is supposed to protect us.
Yeah, there's another. Democracy is the best form of government, except is the worst form of government, except all others. Right? Okay. With that said, yeah, socialism, communism, Marxism,
Dictatorships.
do they value the individual?
No.
Not at all. It's all about the collective, isn't it?
Right.
We're not designed to say. I mean, if you even look at how our system is set, our political system is set up, it is designed to value the individual. The way we elect our leaders, or their senators, and our House of Representatives, and our president, it's all based on the value of the individual.
Because they're elected.
Yeah. So, okay, one more, we'll be done. Look over, if you would, with me at 2 Corinthians 12. And I don't think that's right. I think I went through this last time. I'm sorry, 2 Chronicles 12. Second Chronicles 12. Oh, you're cheating. You don't have any pages to turn.
You're the one that said everybody should have a Bible in the phone.
I agree. It is. They should. Yeah, she packed hers today, so she couldn't get it out. And I told her there wasn't one here she could use. Okay. Now we've we've led up today. We really started with what? Paul's making the statement that God set up that national borders, so if we wanted to, we could happily seek the Lord.
Right.
We're going to see what happens when you don't do that. 2 Chronicles 12. It's going to be about King Rehoboam. He took over. He was Solomon's boy, and he took over for Solomon. He had the two southern tribes. We saw it the other day. Jeroboam took the 10 northern tribes. Rehoboam took the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Verse 13. So King Rehoboam strengthened himself in Jerusalem and reigned. For Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. And he did evil. So if you ever see the charts of the kings, it'll say good king or evil king.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy, he'll come down on the evil side. Now, why did he do evil? Because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. You see that?
Yeah, and what verse is that again?
Verse 14.
Oh.
He did evil. 2 Chronicles 12, verse 14. He did evil because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. Okay, so go over what Paul said. The nations were set up so that people could seek the Lord if they wanted to. If a person individually or a nation as a whole decides not to seek the Lord, what's going to be the response? What's going to be the outcome?
Evil.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
God is not blessing or cursing America. He's not dealing with nations today other than the fact that when a nation decides not to choose God, to get
They're gonna
God
do it.
out of the thinking process, the only authority then is human authority, human viewpoint, and the lust of the flesh, the desires of the mind. And it has, you reject that light, and it has to go evil. That's the way, that's the blessing and the cursing from God, and it's not. It's the blessing that, hey, if you seek after God, if you live in a Christian manner, if we can call it that, there are some good things that happen naturally.
Right.
Not because God's reaching out. So yeah, that's a great country. I'm going to give them more gold and more ships and whatever, more wheat today. It's going to rain on that country, but not on this country. No, it rains everywhere.
Well, and that just kind of goes along with Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 and 8. Of course, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Says, whatever you sow, I mean, whatsoever
Yeah.
man soweth,
You reap.
That
reap.
he
That's
reaps.
where we're at right
That's
now.
right.
We're reaping so much
That's right.
that, you know, like we said, all the way from Second World War, well, it goes back even beyond that, but especially from that on,
Sure.
as we can see it,
Yeah.
now we're reaping nothing but corruption.
Yep.
You can see the three events there that are very clearly defined in the history of America, and these are true of all countries. Okay, I'm the biggest American home. I'm not anti-American, but you can see, yeah, what happened. Society changed after World War II. Okay, society certainly changed, but you got two big events. You got what I call Woodstock, but that free love generation, the hippies of the '60s, destroyed the family.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing is Roe v. Wade, that destroyed how we valued life. There's nothing worse than a group of people standing up fighting for the right to kill their own children.
Yep.
If that doesn't outrage a person, now you were talking about being past feeling, you know, like he says.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but
Without natural effects.
right, but what happened? That happened because those didn't happen while we seeked God.
Right.
We'd already started down that path. Now it is accelerated, I understand. And that was the big culture war there. It was that greatest generation, my parents, that greatest generation, my parents are the children of the greatest
Right.
generation. Those are the ones that were there in the 60s. They were the hippies. And you did have two. You had one that didn't want the change, and then you had the ones and of course the ones that wanted the change, they won. And that's where it brings us today. And you can see that starting to work out in our country today.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean any we're better or any worse than any other country. It happened to Europe 500 years before us.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to happen to, if the Lord tarries, it's going to happen to Japan and China 500 years from now. You can just watch it.
Right.
You can just watch it. Turkey, you know, I mean, it happened quickly in the Middle East in Paul's day. That was a long way to talk about, hey, Paul says that God set up nations so that if you want to, you can seek after God.
Mm-hmm.
Understand there's something going on here. This is not just God creating things and taking his hands off and saying, boy, I wonder how this is going to work out. Let's see what social experiment this is going to work out to be. God loves free will. It's the very first thing he set up. He set up nations to protect that free will, so if we want, we can seek after him. And you know what? He wants us to. Because how many people does God want to have saved?
All men.
It's his will that all men be saved. And what? Come to the knowledge
Of the
of
truth.
the truth. Understand these things. Get saved, yes. And then understand these things. Understand there's a battle going on in the spiritual realm that is real.
Right.
And it works out. We see it. We think it's the flesh. But I tell you, if you're an R or you're a D or you're an S or an I, it's all the same. It's all works out in an ungodly manner.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be any different until Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom where he rules.
Right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your love. We thank you for your grace. We do thank you for the issues that you have set up here, that the institutions that you've set up, free will, marriage, family, human government, to protect those first three, so we can live a peaceable life, so that if people want to, they can seek after you. They're again proving the value you place on free will. Understanding that if people will just look at your son and see in your son what you see in your son, they'll love him like you do. That free will to respond positively to the gospel. We do thank you for your love. We do thank you for your grace. We thank you for your wisdom and are in awe of your power. In your name, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
You know, that free will